I'm Lucy.
And I'm Jennifer.
You're listening to Everything I Know About.
Each week, we share everything we know about a new topic, equipped with some internet research and a little too much exposure to pop culture.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back.
Hi, everyone.
Today, we have a bit of a different type of episode. We are actually marking the 1-year anniversary of our podcast.
I can't believe it's been that long already.
I actually checked the calendar for last year, and it was literally on October 23rd that we recorded our introduction episode.
Wow.
And today is October 25th, so we are almost exactly a year.
And we didn't release our first episode until January, though. So that's why for our listeners, it probably doesn't seem like a full year. But yeah, Lucy and I have been recording since October. And so, yeah, it's been a long journey.
This is also our 40th episode, which is also crazy. We're like pretty prolific. It's actually the 43rd week of this year, and we've released 40 episodes. So we actually average an episode a week.
Yeah, an episode a week for this long is so much content. Seeing those numbers, it's like, damn, we can feel proud about that.
Totally. And it has been super fun. I honestly never expected even for our podcast to get this big. I remember when we first launched, we were like, what should we aspire to? What should our goal be? And I think we were both like, if we get to 1,000 listeners, that would be so special. And we've far surpassed that. So for the Ika fam that's been here from day one, we thank you so much. And for our new listeners, it's so great to have you here. Truly, what keeps us motivated is when we see your comments, when you guys write in with topic ideas, and when we get your feedback. It's just super rewarding.
We love your Instagram DMs.
Yeah, so we really appreciate it. And I think because of this 1-year anniversary, we wanted to spend this episode sharing some of our individual reflections and learnings from our first year of making content. Also giving you guys a peek into some of the behind the scenes stuff on how we make the show. If anyone has listened to the Passion Economy episode, we talked in that episode about how a lot of times creators will make an episode like this one when they're quote unquote successful or on the other side after they've started the thing. And in the Passion Economy episode, we were kind of like, yeah, it's a little suspicious because those episodes tend to do a lot better than their normal content because there's all the dreamers out there who obviously want to follow their journey and like try to do something similar themselves.
We're not selling you anything.
But for us, we're
this
really
is not an MLM.
No MLM here. We just thought it would be a good opportunity because we've had a lot of questions like, oh, what mics do you guys use? How do you make your recordings sound so professional? How are you doing the editing? And if you are like us, who literally we were in your shoes, we were both just fans of podcasts. Always thought maybe one day we would make one, but never thought that seriously about it. And now that we like know what actually goes into making one, if you're in those shoes, like hopefully this episode kind of helps you get a sense for what to expect. And then we also have a little announcement, which I will say now, but hopefully the remainder of the episode will provide context for this announcement. And that is that we are going to move to an every other week release schedule. As you know, we tried out every other week in the summer with plans to come back to weekly since September, and we've been on this weekly release schedule since then. But since the podcast is not our full-time jobs, Jennifer and I, we actually launched a startup in mid-August called Pagebound. If you didn't listen to that episode, think if Goodreads and Reddit had a baby, and that is Pagebound. And we've just really struggled to maintain the weekly release schedule with also the full-time job of trying to run and grow our startup. And we're gearing up for Pagebound's public launch because right now we're in beta and a lot of our podcast listeners are part of that beta, which is very exciting. But we expect that work to really ramp up through the end of this year and onwards. And so as a result, we've had to make the tough decision to go to an every other week release schedule. I mean, it's tough because we honestly do love making content every week, but there's just so much more that goes into it other than just the research for the episodes and the hour or so that we spend recording. Like the editing work truly just takes so much time. And since we don't make money from the podcast right now, we're just doing the editing ourselves. And those hours, unfortunately, just need to get reallocated right now to Pagebound.
We were hopeful by this point in our journey that we would have enough ad revenue to hire an editor, so we weren't doing it all in-house. And since that just hasn't happened, we can't sustain all of the hours that go into the podcast, unfortunately. So moving to this bi-weekly schedule will allow us to keep doing this and like keep putting out content while not making it such a strain. But with that being said, if our listeners really value this weekly content and want to hear from us, the best way that you can cast your vote is by going to Patreon and supporting us. Our lowest tier on Patreon is $5. So if you're in a position to help out and our show means something to you, we would love if you came to Patreon and supported us. This would not only be a vote to have us go back to a weekly schedule, but allow us to do that in a really sustainable way that lets us be creators for you guys and do something that we love to do and hopefully that you love listening to as well.
And thank you, of course, to those who are already supporting us on Patreon. Your financial support is really what helps us cover some of our costs. Okay, so that's our little announcement. Now to the rest of our episode. So I feel like a good place to start is just with the basics of how we actually make the show. And so, like, in practice, our startup costs for this show were extremely low. Like, literally, Jennifer and I just bought $50 mics on Amazon.
It's shocking how well these work though.
Totally.
It's a Samsung something?
Yeah. So the mic is a Samsung Q2U. I think it's considered an entry level mic. I remember when we first started, do you remember we were like, do we need some sort of XLR cable? I don't even, is that the right word?
I was just about to say that. I don't know if that's the right word, but yeah, like clips into this completely separate like brick of a thing that is like an audio compressor or processor. And it's a whole setup. And that would have cost hundreds of dollars to do. And the person I was saying was like, that's a terrible idea not to go with the high end audio. Like this $50 mic is going to sound awful. And I don't know. I think it
And
sounds
they were
good.
wrong. It sounds
They
great.
were wrong. It sounds great.
Yeah. So this mic, it literally just has like a USB plug-in that we plug into our computers. And that's pretty much all of the specialized equipment.
Yeah, so when we first got our mics, Lucy and I actually recorded our first episodes together in person. I went and visited her in New York, and she has like this beautiful 2 bedroom in Brooklyn. So we are like plenty of space to do this. And we thought we were going to be those cool podcast girls that sit on the couch and like, you know, the view where it's like the Nick Vial files or something where everyone's in the living room sitting around chatting and like having this really interesting conversation, like the camera's panning and you have the different views. We couldn't figure any of that out. Like we tried so hard to be in the same room and record, and it just did not work for the life of us. The audio was echoing off of each other. So I ended up going into one of her bedrooms. Lucy stood in the living room and we recorded separately. And to this day, we've recorded every single episode in separate rooms.
True. Even when we've been together, like when I've been in Nashville, in Jennifer's house, we've had to record in separate rooms because we cannot figure out the echo issue. I do not know how those people are doing that still.
I have no idea. And we tried the best software out there for podcasting. Like everyone recommends if you like Google, what are you going to use to record and edit? The first thing that's going to come up is Riverside FM. My First Million, these really big podcasts use it. I'm like, okay, well, if they can figure it out, surely we can. Spoiler alert, we could not. And so we stopped using Riverside. And then we tried out Descript, which is what we use today. Yeah, and like Lucy does all of the editing and she does an excellent job. So Lucy, why don't you tell us a bit about like your decision to use Descript full time and how that's worked out?
Yeah, so Descript, the original reason why it really appealed to me is because it's marketed as audio editing for true newbies. You just upload your audio files and it literally creates a transcript, and then you can edit the text just like you were editing a Word doc. And so if you want to remove a word, you just delete the word in the text. And so that's how it was marketed. And we signed up for the trial and started editing our podcast there. I mean, turns out it's really not as simple as they make it seem. Like, often when you're deleting just one word, you're also deleting part of another word. Or, you know, you have to do a lot of manipulation around the starts or the ends of sentences just to make it sound natural and not like a robot literally came in and chopped up your words. But we kind of got stuck because then we both learned how to edit into script. And we were like, oh, well, now we know how to use this. If we switched platforms, it would be really hard to like learn a new platform. And this was like when we picked up podcast editing a year ago. I think now Riverside also does have some of this text editing. So our info might be a little outdated, but as of today, we are still using Descript. I would say I'm like middle happy with it. It definitely does not solve all my problems, but it was extremely easy to learn. Like there really was no learning curve. And obviously we still use it. So we stuck with it.
The biggest learning curve with editing, especially at the beginning, was the word like and taking out the word like. So I say like a lot. I say a lot. You realize how much you pause in between your words when you're editing. I even notice it now in conversations. I sound like I'm buffering in real time. Like the little buffer wheel is going and I have to like think of the next word, but that's like a full second and a half. And you have to cut that out. But regardless, when you say the word like, it comes out in two different sounds. It's la. If you cut out just one part of it, or like from the text transcripts, you get these all over the place because it doesn't cut out the second part. So something as simple as that, that it happens all the time. It's like things that you would never think about that you just have to learn through experience, unfortunately.
Yeah, totally. And then you have to manually remove them, which is why editing takes hours. So people get a sense of the numbers. To release episodes weekly, we record once a week and we block off like an hour and a half to record. So that's already after we've spent 2 hours, sometimes more, depending on the topic, doing research. And after we record, let's say we record an hour 15 of content, that usually after editing becomes a 45-minute episode. So a lot of content, and truthfully, it's not even like good content. It's us pausing, us saying like, us being confusing, gets cut out. And that's because we don't script our shows. So I do think part of why editing takes so long for us is because we truly don't use any scripts. And I like not using scripts because I feel like it comes across way more naturally. In the beginning, there were a couple early episodes that we did try to script.
Oh, it was so bad.
Our outlines were so detailed, and it was so awkward to record.
Yeah, it was so bad. So even just the process of figuring out how you talk about the subject that you want to talk about is a huge learning curve. I mean, that's the meat of what a podcast is. And for that to be a learning curve sounds really counterintuitive because you think you just turn on the microphone and you hit record and you start talking, but then your mind goes blank. Like you really have to have some sort of outline for yourself or some talking points. Frankly, I didn't think it was gonna be like that. I thought it was gonna be just like having a conversation with you, but that's not how it feels. It really does feel like you have an audience in the room and it changes the vibe. So we started off by having these general ideas of what we wanted to talk about. Like one of our episodes is about motherhood. What was another early episode we did?
The girl boss episode.
Yeah, girl bossing too close to the sun. And these are conversations that Lucy and I had individually all the time. So it's not like this was new content even to each other. But when you want to make it valuable and like have quotes and have research to back it up, you have to have those stats readily available next to your point in an outline. And then in the early days, we thought that that meant having a literal script. Like we had sticky notes that we were posting on our laptop. Yeah, I'd be like, "This is the next talking point. Okay, I'm gonna pass it off to you with this line, and I'm gonna write it down on my sticky note." It was so unnatural.
And I feel like you can totally hear that in our earlier content. We've gotten much better.
Yeah, we do not do that anymore.
We still do use outlines, and the most planning we do is like we just talk about, okay, what do we want to cover in this 30 to 45-minute episode and who's going to take what topics to research, but we really truly do not look at what the other person has researched before so that we are having genuine reactions when we are sharing it live with you guys in the pod.
That was also a hard one lesson though to not read each other's research before because then it's so awkward to read it and then have a cool point and be like, "Oh wow." You like already know what they're gonna say. So much better if we just don't read each other's research and we are genuinely reacting to each other.
Even awkward for the person reading it because it's like I can see obviously Jennifer's face when we're recording and she can see mine. So like our eyes are communicating to one another, you know? So if it's not genuine or if she's confused, then I have to repeat what I say or like it throws me off. And I think that's part of the crafting process, the storytelling process. I feel like just even as a communicator, I have improved so much. I was never one to be afraid of public speaking necessarily, but I never thought I was a good storyteller. I'm not the kind of person who, in a crowd, I'm about to like regale you with some hilarious story and it makes sense and there's a beginning, middle, end, and some sort of payoff. Like, I never ever thought I was that type of person or good at that. But I think the podcast has really forced me to kind of think about narrative structure and like how do you present information in an engaging way. Jennifer and I, we have slightly different styles. Like I like facts and I like research and I like to like really feel confident in my research and feel confident in what I'm saying, sharing something I've double checked 8 million times with different sources. And something I realized was like, okay, even though that gives me comfort and is information how I like to consume it, it is like not interesting. It is not interesting if you just share a bunch of stats. And one thing I've learned from Jennifer is just like, I think you're more of a natural storyteller, you know? And that facts can be interesting if you like position them the right way within the context of a story.
And Lucy has taught me that it is good to have facts and to double check them and triple check them because there have been times where I'll say some shit that I read in an article and Lucy will literally be like, Jennifer, that's not right. Like, I literally read the stat and you're saying it wrong. This is actually a funny anecdote. So, in our Mafia Economies episode, I read this article about all of the different kinds of food types that the mafia sells abroad in Italy. And one of them is mozzarella. And I said on the pod that this counterfeit mozzarella is actually made from rotting fish. And they like put citric acid on the rotting fish to make it not smell bad, and that's your mozzarella. And she was like, "Are you kidding me? That's disgusting." I'm like, "Isn't it so gross? I'm not eating mozzarella again. That's awful. Got to make sure it's authentic." And she was like, "But that's actually really dangerous if somebody has a seafood allergy. Like, how are they getting away with this?" Then Lucy texted me later and she's like, "Jennifer, I looked that up. Like, that's not right at all. What this article was saying is that they sell rotting seafood and put citric acid on the seafood to make it not smell, not that the mozzarella was made of that fish." Okay, we gotta cut that entire thing, which is really unfortunate because I thought that was gonna be like a viral TikTok moment. I thought I was gonna get some gold with that. Uh-uh.
That was so funny. To be fair to you, it was a strange sentence structure. Like they just finished talking about mozzarella, there was a period, and then immediately they moved on to this fish topic. So I
We're gonna blame the
understand.
article on that
Yeah,
one.
I understand the confusion. But yeah, it's so funny because that episode did so well. It is what brought in majority of our listeners, and it was your idea to do that episode. When you suggested it, we were both like, "Oh, this seems cool," but it sat in our backlog for so many weeks until finally, we were like, "Okay, let's just do it. It sounds interesting." And it's been interesting because obviously our podcast, literally the title, Everything I Know About, we chose it so that we could keep the content super broad. We didn't want to bore ourselves, right? And we wanted to like look into topics that we were genuinely interested in and wanted to research. And so as a result, across these 40 episodes, we have such a wide variety of topics. And
Yeah.
I mean, truly, like, how do we come up with them? It's just us being like, what are we curious about?
No, honestly, that was even a learning curve figuring out what we were gonna talk about. Like, at the very beginning, before we released our episodes in January, when we were recording last October, the name of this podcast was Too Ambitious, TWO Ambitious.
Mhm.
And the content was gonna be more about, like, us starting our business. We didn't even know PageBound was gonna be the business that we were starting back at that time, so it was gonna be, like, following our journey, talking about entrepreneurship, being, like, a female founder. And then we very quickly realized that that was gonna get boring very quickly, and we didn't wanna be these, like, high and mighty, like, talking down to the people, like, as if we knew what we were doing. I am a first-time founder, so we're learning along with everybody else, and we're like, "How do we make this more of a learning experience as a community rather than, like, we're authorities talking to an audience?" Because that's not what we are. So everything I know about was really born of that desire to not have a niche. But when you don't have a niche, it's also like the whole world is open to you. And I feel like a lot of the content that I suggest comes from my TikTok scrolling. And often at the beginning of episodes, you'll hear me be like, "Yeah, I was awake at 3 a.m. scrolling through TikTok and found this video, and now we're talking about it on the pod." And so that's often where my subjects come from.
Yeah, and for me, definitely it's inspired by a lot of the content I consume. I'll hear an interesting fact from another podcast or I'll read an article and it'll spark something for me. Or like something will just come up in conversation and I'll realize I don't actually know anything about that topic. And then I'm like, oh, perfect. Put it in my notes app. We'll cover it on the podcast so I can become educated in this, even just for my own life.
Yeah.
And I think as a result, that's why it's still so fun for us to record because truly every week we get to pick whatever we're interested in. And it's very easy for us to agree. I feel like we have enough shared interests where we often have a list of many, many ideas rather than just struggling to pick one.
Have we ever had a topic that you really wanted to do or I really wanted to do that we didn't agree on?
I don't think so.
Oh, there's one that I can think of, but
Oh, for you?
no, it was one of your topics I didn't want to do.
Oh, I don't even remember. Well, which one is it?
You wanted to talk about like cops and crime.
Oh,
Like the idea of the episode was like, is the crime rate actually as high as people say it is?
yeah.
And the stats that you hear about like murder rates, is that actually true? Is it fear mongering of some sort? And truthfully, like I was nervous to do that episode because I'm nervous to do anything that like even gets remotely political or ideological. Like I think you can hear from our content what our ideology is, but it's just I don't know. Even talking about this right now, frankly, is like really uncomfortable. Like Lucy's
I
face is like,
know.
shut the fuck up, Jennifer.
Yeah, it's so tricky. I think for that episode, like the real life thing that inspired it was the fact that, like, I live in New York City. There have all of a sudden been so many more police officers in the subways. In fact, even the National Guard was sent in to the subway system. And I keep hearing that, like, subway crime is increasing. I vaguely know historically there was all these crime waves where also New York was seen as like a not safe city. What is actually happening? But of course, that topic touches on so many complicated things like the prison industrial system, politics, policy, etc. And I do ultimately agree with the decision not to do that because I just feel like, I mean, part of us doing this podcast is like we're freely admitting we are not experts on any of the topics we talk about. Literally, we're doing internet research that technically anybody could do, and we're just gathering that data and like adding our own lens to it. I feel like there are certain topics where it feels like you do need a little bit more expertise to be able to like comprehensively cover all of the points. And we have had more serious topics on the pod that I'm really happy with and I feel like are some of our best episodes. Like I felt this way about our gentrification episode
Mhm.
where it's just such a nuanced topic. And we spent a lot of time researching and I spent a lot of time editing to try to make that episode make any sense because yeah, I mean Jennifer and I were having like very real live conversations. A lot of the times we're trying to figure out what we believe even as we're talking.
Yeah.
And so I think that doing those episodes can be really rewarding, but it's also really challenging. And I mean, that also comes along with being a public figure because the world is just so polarized. It's scary to put your own personal, political, religious, whatever beliefs out there and then have people just judge you just based on that and like not appreciate the nuance.
Mhm. And it gets really hard too when things can be clipped. And we do use our clips on TikTok. That's our only podcast promotion. So even just clipping out little snippets of our podcast, you lose context and then people just ram you in the comments. And it's so tempting to respond to every single one. Like, we had a full 45-minute conversation about this. Like, go listen to the episode. But when you're just getting like a 1 minute snippet, it's impossible to provide all of that nuanced context. So, that being said, like, yeah, those episodes are very rewarding, but there is a level of, I think, like both irresponsibility in talking about certain like really big topics if we're not experts, but also just a lot of vulnerability that frankly I'm not quite ready to launch into quite yet.
Yeah. I feel like sometimes creators obviously will release supporter only episodes or whatever. And I've seen like different podcasters take different approaches. Sometimes they like save all their funny, goofy, chatty episodes for the Patreon and then they release serious public episodes to the main feed. I wonder if for us it'll almost be the opposite. I don't know. I'm curious what people want to hear from us, but like I would definitely be comfortable talking about some of those more challenging topics, doing the research and having a lot more time also to prep for them rather than trying to like do it every week if that's what people wanted and then putting those on our Patreon for supporters.
Yeah. Another thing about the Patreon, like we would love to hear in the comments from you guys if it's something that you would support if we did have exclusive content. You can get in touch with us on Instagram, TikTok, via our comments on Spotify, anywhere that we are. Feel free to get in touch because we're really trying to figure out how we can provide value on the Patreon to make it a viable option. And some ideas that we've had are having exclusive content, like Lucy just said, but also I've been wondering if the amount of editing that we do is even necessary for people that already know us and like know the quality of the content that we bring out. And since the editing is really the piece of the puzzle that makes this so time consuming, if we put out our episodes that are an hour or even an hour and 20 minutes recorded, and they're not polished and perfect like you hear today, but a little bit rough around the edges. Is that something that you would be interested in listening to? And like maybe it's a little bit more rambly, but I don't know. A lot of podcasts out there are on the longer side, and some people enjoy that. But it's also nice to get those really crisp snippets that you get right now. They're like 30 minutes, really high quality. So yeah, I would love to hear what the community's preference is on content type.
Yeah, totally. And then, I mean, you obviously just mentioned TikTok as the channel for us to grow. And I think this is another thing that I would say I kind of went in eyes wide open. Like, I had heard from people that growing a podcast is really hard. There's very little discovery within podcast apps. Like, even the search functionality in Spotify or Apple Podcasts is not that great. And people just tend to go to those places when they already know what they're going to listen to instead of with an active mind to discover new content.
Yeah.
So we knew that, but we also thought because Jennifer had some experience with TikTok. She has a Book Talk account far before we even started the podcast. And she knew that, for example, TikTok is different than Instagram, which I was more familiar with. Instagram, you have to kind of be someone to get your content even out there. I feel like TikTok is really friendly to new creators. You don't need followers. As long as your content is good, it can get views. And for us, the past year, really how we've grown our listener base to now around 5,000 subscribers is through TikTok. So we've had a handful, like a small number of these viral clips, and they'll get a million views, let's say. And then, like, a small percentage of those people will listen to the actual podcast. And we see the spikes directly after the clip goes viral. We see the spike. We see our followers increase. We see our listeners increase. And so I would say, on the one hand, it's been really rewarding because obviously, as just two normal people without followings, we've been able to achieve the success that we have. But it's also been really frustrating because we do not really understand the TikTok algorithm at all. Like,
No.
a lot of times I post clips and I'm like, this is so interesting. This is going to do great. And then it totally flops.
Yeah.
Even after now, we have like almost 26,000 followers now on TikTok, but it's not like our clips do significantly better. Like, I think it still really depends on the quality of the clip itself. It really has nothing to do with how many followers you have on TikTok.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the tough things too is we don't have studios and we don't have professional camera setups. Clearly, I record in my bedroom. My background is not professional, especially compared to Lucy. Like Lucy, you kind of look like you're in a studio and your
I
lighting is
appreciate that.
good. No, you look professional. I certainly don't. And it's a difficult hurdle to cross on TikTok because it very much doesn't look like organic TikTok content. And it doesn't look like the really high quality studio stuff. I don't know if that's something that is a hindrance to us, but it's been challenging, yeah, definitely to grow. But it's the only avenue that has worked. Like if you go on Reddit and ask people or like look up articles about how people are growing their podcasts, it is a doozy out there. Like it's really word of mouth. So yeah, I mean, if it's not TikTok or like our listeners sharing it with friends and family, then there's really not much we can do.
Mhm. Yeah. And so it really comes in spikes. Like, it's funny, even though we've been releasing episodes every week,
We haven't seen any growth from putting out content every week. What gets us somewhere is posting TikToks, which is wild, but we don't want to be like TikTok influencers. We want to make podcast content.
yeah, totally. 100% we don't want to be TikTok influencers.
No, it's a necessary evil. That's it.
Being on TikTok was such an eye-opening experience for me. As a person who prior to the podcast had no public presence online besides my LinkedIn that was public, like my Instagram is private, everything is private. It was a real doozy to suddenly be posting TikTok content, which has our faces on it, online, and then reading the comments too. And like at first, obviously, a lot of our clips didn't get any views, and people were really nice and supportive. But then, the con of when you do get one of these videos that does better, depending on what side of the internet it is hitting or the TikTok algorithm is sending it to, you get a lot of people who are just kind of nasty. And it definitely was a process for me to come to terms with just emotionally how to even deal with online hate and like trolls. And now I
Yeah.
just don't read the comments for our videos that do incredibly well.
Oh, I love reading them.
It's not good for my mental health. You're better at letting it just like roll off your back. For me, I really take it personally and I still am working on how to not let it get to me.
I love snarkily responding to the comments that are shitty. It's like my personal favorite thing to do. And I don't do it that much on the pod one because it's shared and I can't inject that much of my own personality on a shared account. But I did have a TikTok go viral on my personal account and that was so fun. I felt like the shackles were off. I could respond to everybody however I wanted. And it was so snarky. It was so much fun.
I mean, for the record, you can be snarky on ours. I don't mind. I'm not even reading them, so it's totally fine.
On a few of them I had. One person commented on our history of pumpkin spice and they commented like, "Did you know pumpkin spice had pumpkin in it or something?" I was like, "Oh my god. That's incredible information. Thank you so much." Like these trolls are so ridiculous.
I just remember one where someone was like, "Oh, these two girls just decided to start a podcast." And your response was so good. It was, "Oh, actually, no, we got an invite from the International Podcaster Society to start this podcast."
Yeah, mofo, what do you think happens? I buy a microphone and I put my voice out there. Like, so can you.
Yeah, even though it's been challenging to deal with the trolls, it's fine because those people never end up listening to our show anyway. And like, I feel like the people who our content does resonate with, they listen to the show. Truly, we think of you guys as our little community, and it's really rewarding to kind of find your people. And I mean, even frankly, our page bound startup is about that too, in a reader context, finding your people. But I think just as humans, it feels great.
Definitely.
Podcasting, I feel like it's an art form that has always resonated with me. I literally have been listening to podcasts since I was like a young kid in high school because It was introduced to me in my English class by my teacher who would play This American Life episodes in class. And I was like, wow, this is just storytelling. Like, this is so interesting. And then that's how I got into podcasts. I mean, I still regularly listen to This American Life. And just last week, they released this big announcement. Basically, there have been a lot of changes in the podcast industry, and the ad market has dropped significantly. They said that their ad revenue is literally a third less than what they brought in just a few years ago. And so This American Life is launching subscription, which I mean, the roots of This American Life, it's public radio. So that was like very mind blowing to me that literally the number one top ranked podcast is struggling to keep its staff and like keep itself afloat just with ad revenue. Cause our plan was always, yeah, like hopefully people do not have to pay for our content. We consume a ton of free podcast content ourselves. Hopefully ads can just support us. And that was always our plan from day one. And we are not yet monetized from an ads perspective, although I think we can get there. But I think learning that from This American Life, I was like, oh, even when we get there, the numbers are going to be small. Like it's going to be hard. And obviously, we don't have a whole team to support. So I do think it's helpful. But yeah, I feel like the way not only podcasting, but all creator economies are moving is really to be far more listener supported. And like you see that with Substack, you see that with Patreon and podcast creation, you see that with artists. And yeah, that's why for us, if you are in a position to help out, if you like our show, if it means something to you, we really hope that you'll support us on Patreon.
Frankly, I hope even if we are able to do ads one day that we don't have to. I hate listening to ads on podcasts. I would so much rather be community supported. Benchtopia is an example of a podcast that we really admire, and they don't have ads on their free episodes because their Patreon community is so thriving. And so my ideal state would be to stay exactly like it is now for our free listeners and have like a really thriving Patreon community where we can provide a lot of value over there.
We're moving to this every other week schedule out of necessity. But if we did see a lot of support on our Patreon, we're totally willing to make more content. It's just about having enough time in the day, and like having support helps us with resources to get more research, more editing, all of that done.
Totally.
All right, Jennifer, any last advice for our listeners who might be wanting to start their own podcast?
I say just do it. Don't wait to have the perfect co host or the perfect microphone or the perfect setup. I've listened to podcasts that were recorded with iPhones, and there are so many tools these days to just record right where you're going to distribute your podcast. Just do it and see what happens. The worst that happens is nobody listens. And is that really that bad of an outcome?
For us, when we tried it, we got enough joy out of just making the episodes where even if people didn't listen, it was still fun. And for us, I think that's why we've been able to stick with it for this entire year and make 40 episodes, because we genuinely love making this creative project. So yeah, I would totally try it.
Thanks for being here for this year-long journey so far, and we are excited to see what the next year brings. Hopefully, we have a lot more of you when we do our 2-year check-in 1 year from now. And yeah, as always, if you have any thoughts, suggestions, comments on anything that we've said during today's podcast, feel free to reach out to us. You know where to find us.
Yeah, and just some final housekeeping. You should expect 2 more episodes from us this year in November. And then we are going to take a little time off for the holidays. So we'll be taking a little hiatus in December, but definitely expect 2 more episodes from us this year. And then we'll be back in January. And I don't know, we might do a little exclusive bonus episode, maybe end of year for our Patreon supporters too.
Yeah. And by this point, we now have 40 episodes. There should be plenty of content, especially if you're a newer listener, to go back and hold you over until the new year, hopefully.
Yeah.
And then you can hear all of our growth in those early episodes.
Oh,
You can do a little compare and contrast.
yeah. If you're new and you want to listen to our backlog, maybe start from the most recent and then work your way backwards instead of starting from episode 1.
I always want to tell people, like, don't go from episode 1 and go up, like, just go down.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. If you enjoy the pod, we would love for you to give us a follow and rate us on Apple Podcasts, which helps us get the word out and reach new listeners. Our sources are available on Patreon, where if you choose to become a patron, you'll also get access to bonus content, our monthly book club, and our eternal gratitude.
If you'd like to get in touch or suggest a topic for a future episode, email us at everythingiknowaboutpod@gmail.com or DM us across all socials at EikaPod, that's EIKA pod. Thanks for listening and see you next week.